Hello and welcome back to a new series on the Pinnacle Esports channel where we're going to look at players across the HLTV Fantasy League. So we've gathered up a group of experts and we'll look at each of the different players across the events, from people that we think you should pick and people that we think you should avoid. So this is going to be a new series we're going to experiment with, and we're going to start off with the BLAST Spring Showdown. We're going to start off with Europe. And we'd love to hear your guys' feedback across this and see how you'd like it to improve. And if anyone else you'd like to get involved in the series, then feel free to contact us and we'd be more than happy to let you come in as an expert pick if you are suitable. So the first player that we're going to look at is a player to buy. So the one thing to look at when we're talking about BLAST Premier Spring, it's a single elimination event, which means it's going to be very straightforward for who you want to pick. And when I say it's going to be straightforward, it's what two teams do you think are going to make the grand final? Because those are the teams that are going to generate you the most points because they'll be winning the most games and therefore their players can perform the best. You tend to want to keep away from having players that are going to perform fairly evenly in a match. So like we have the Ninjas in Pajamas and OG matchup. That could be a fairly close match. So you probably want to tend to not pick one of those players from that team, because if you pick one of those players and the match goes close, then they're not going to gain you very many points unless a player has an incredible series. So the first player I want to look at is nicoodoz. So nicoodoz is my player to buy, and he's currently 211,000. They have their first game up against 9, and then their semi-final game could be either against Big or Rare Atom. For me, Fnatic are a team that should make the grand final. It'd be a very disappointing result if they went out to 9 or even Rare Atom or Big, but they are a team that have a nice matchup to start off the event with, and they should make the grand final. Not only that, but nicoodoz has had some insane form over the last few months here. ESL Pro League Season 17 has been exceptionally good for him. So I think in terms of when you're looking at Fnatic players, nicoodoz is the one that you want to look at. Roy is also another one. He's a fan favorite. I know people love to pick Roy, but when you need to get an AWPer and an AWPer that's going to perform at this event, especially when Shiro is priced so highly for a mid to AWPer, nicoodoz is definitely a solid option, because when it comes down to role selection as well, having a main AWP as a role is guaranteed points. You know that they're always going to be buying the AWP across the game. So there's no fear of losing points. It's not like having to pick, I don't know, a clutch player, because a game could be entirely dominated by that team, so clutches might not come through. But whereas the AWP, they're always going to buy an AWP. I think players from Fnatic are going to be a very good shout for this event. It's really picking your team from each side of the bracket that you think is going to do well. So it should be Fnatic and Cloud9, which takes us on to our next player of HObbit. So HObbit has been our expert player to buy across the board. He seems to be a player that is priced relatively well, especially when you look at Axel or Shiro. They are two players that are very, very expensive. And although they might give you the points, it's very, very difficult to see if the point to price is going to work out in favor. It usually does. I mean, when you look at someone like ZywOo at the previous ESL Pro League Season 17 had an insane tournament. And, you know, that's one where people got so many points of him, but he was so expensive. But luckily, they'd also picked Jax, who was cheap. So when you can find a player like Jax and ZywOo and pair them together to kind of even out to a, 400k, then that works out. But it's very unlikely that you're going to find a player like Jax, who was around the 174,000 mark, and them actually perform at a 1.25 rating. I mean, that was what he had at the group stage at least. So HObbit is going to be a player that you'll find on Cloud9, is meant to be the third star of the team, and is definitely going to be someone that is almost guaranteed to make the final. They have their first game against Copenhagen Flames, and then their semi-final game will be against NIP or OG, and both those teams are in a state at the minute. NIP currently playing with Config, they're struggling to pick up results, they didn't make the playoff stage, and OG, again, they are out without Nexa And the reason they didn't make the playoff stage is because they got beat by NIP. So it's tough to have faith in either NIP or OG. So we had a few experts pick Config as a player not to buy. He's not our overall expert pick not to buy, but I wouldn't put your faith in NIP or OG. Cloud9 will probably dominate the bracket and are the likely candidates to win the event. So doubling down on Cloud9 is very advisable. Now, we've given HObbit the entry fragger as a potential role for the team. This is something that can be interchangeable. You could give him a CT rating, you could even give him the support rating, but we think that if you're going to pick HObbit, your most likely other option for your C9 pick might be a Buster or an Atheny. And if you take Buster, I think currently he's got around 26% support rounds. So you're probably going to want to chuck the support stat onto Buster. So HObbit and Buster could be a really good pairing for C9. And then you could, pick up a nicoodoz as well. But we would definitely, our experts have definitely said that HObbit is the pick to go for on Cloud9. And that is more relative to price. If Axel was priced at the same or Shira was priced at the same, I can guarantee you they would have said that. But you have to think about with this, it's going to be relative price to performance. And HObbit is in a lovely spot here. So you could chuck the entry fragger on. The roles are very interchangeable for HObbit. It'll be down to how you feel it's going to go. Now, my first player to avoid will be flameZ. flameZ is in a tough spot right now. Nexa has just taken some personal leave from the team and they've added Nico in. So they're not really in a position where I can see them winning matches. Like I say, the NIP OG matchup will be very tight. NIP won that last matchup when they played ESL Pro League. I'm not sure how it's going to go. They're both teams that are only going to improve with time, you'd hope. But considering NIP won the last matchup, it's likely they might come in and win it again. I think on paper, when you've got flameZ now in an IGL role, whether that's temporary, whether Nexa comes back, whatever happens there, flameZ being in an IGL role is the reason, and my main reason, for avoiding him. His stats at Pro League were not very good, and I don't think they're going to get better into this event, especially if OG don't go far, because if OG make the semifinals, Cloud9 should dominate them. So yeah, flameZ is not someone who is going to come into this event and come out of the event with high stats. You might even look to go to Dexter, but Dexter would also be my other player to avoid. I don't think that OG, you can be confident enough in OG to make a long run at this event for you to have that much investment. At 210,000, that is too much of a gamble, too much of a risk. And it's just, it's not a player worth grabbing. I would also say the same about NIP players. Although they are relatively cheap, I would not grab any NIP players either. Their config is around the 180,000 mark, I believe. And yeah, you might want to look at that and see that he was the best performing player of NIP at Pro League. But again, it's too much of a gamble. Will NIP beat OG? Possibly. Will they then go on to beat C9? Very, very unlikely. So yeah, when we want to look at these matchups, especially for this event as it's a single elimination, don't be tempted by players that you think will perform well just for a match. If they're only playing one match at this event, then they're not going to gain you the points that you need, especially to achieve a top rank. So flameZ would be my player to avoid. His stats have taken a hit since he's taken over the IGL role, and I can't see this team going any further than the semifinals, with the first match being a very 50-50. JamYoung is the expert player to avoid. And although he's not too expensive at 203,000, his stats are heavily inflated. So as a player from Rare Atom from the Chinese region, this is someone that could be a bit of a bait. We saw that they didn't do too badly at Pro League. They managed to take down Liquid. They managed to take a map off Na'Vi. And honestly, yes, they could beat big in this opening match. But will they then go on? It's a very tough choice with Rare Atom, because I feel like a lot of people are going to do what happened with IHC, and they're going to throw a lot of their cards into into Rare Atom here. And if they do, then, you know, it could come back to bite you. So Big are also a team that, it's a very 50-50 matchup. Big and Rare Atom, they're both teams that have some solid individuals, and it's really going to come down to the day, the veto, that kind of thing. I think a lot of people, when you look at it, will favor Big. They have the experience, although this is an online event. You know, this is something where Big, I mean, they thrived during the online era, so maybe that's another reason that we can favor them into this matchup. But yeah, I think JamYoung is a player with some heavily inflated stats, and if you want someone for around the 203,000 mark, you do not go for these players. I think it's definitely worth looking into Fnatic and Cloud9 for this event. I think avoiding Rare Atom is a safe pick. So our player to buy and our expert player to buy will be nicoodoz and HObbit. I think Cloud9 are pretty much guaranteed to be a grand finalist team at this event. You know, you would say that they probably have the harder side of the bracket with some of the names there, but with the current performances and NIP dropping into the 20th spot in the world right now, Cloud9 should be guaranteed finalists at this event. So doubling down on C9 players, very advisable. And nicoodoz, again, Fnatic are probably going to be the other grand final team here. You could have an argument to say it's going to be Big. Fnatic looked quite good at Pro League, and nicoodoz was exceptional. So yeah, I would definitely, if you're going to take a Fnatic player and you need an AWPer because Sheer is so expensive, nicoodoz is definitely the player to go for. And when we look at our players to avoid and our expert player to avoid, flameZ and JamYoung. These are teams that shouldn't go very far into the event. They might get a win, but they're probably not going to make grand finals. And when you look at someone like OG, if they do win that opening matchup and they play in the semifinals against Cloud9, you do not want that player. Even if flameZ had a good series against NiP coming into C9, it's very unlikely that's going to happen again. If he gets dominated in that matchup, comes out with like a 0.8 rating, then that's going to heavily impact your stats. The other thing with this is that Cloud9 and Fnatic could be two good teams to play the IGL role on, which is why I was saying before that HObbit's roles are quite interchangeable. You could just chuck the IGL on him, especially with, if you had Buster as your pairing, then he'd be someone to have the support role on, and you could play HObbit with the IGL role. So take a look at who you think is going to win in this bracket, and you can make your picks based on that. But here's our picks, and yeah, we'd like to see how you feel about this series, what you'd like to see improve, if there's any people that you'd like to see give their opinions. As you can see, here's our experts that took part in this one, and hopefully we'll gain more as we move on. And yeah, thanks for watching.